Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live. Talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynncullenshow@gmail.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
And good morning to one and all. The morning specifically being June 19th, Juneteenth. And a happy one to all who celebrate this federal holiday. Juneteenth. I want to actually start by doing a little history or a correction of history, because as usual, things get simplified to the point of almost becoming untrue, so that this sense that Juneteenth marks the time when the people who were slaves in Texas belatedly learned that, in fact, they had been emancipated by President Lincoln. And Charles Blow wrote I thought, just a really good piece today, and I'm going to share some of it with you because he started by actually saying that Vice President Kamala Harris, the first Black person to hold that position, said something incorrect in a White House ceremony about Juneteenth. And she said the enslaved people of Texas learned they were free, and they claimed their freedom on that day. And Charles Blow says, well, no. The fact is that a lot of that, what she said, is, again, wrong. Just wrong. No less a renowned scholar of history, African American history, than Henry Louis Gates Jr., the Harvard professor and the host of one of my favorite shows, Finding Your Roots, told Charles Blow, I've never met a scholar who believes it's true that the enslaved people of Texas did not know about the Emancipation Proclamation. I always assumed, well, they didn't know because, news traveled slowly in those days, but not that slowly. So it is odd. So if that's the case, then how come the whole idea of Juneteenth being this point at which the clueless enslaved people of Texas learned that, in fact, they had been emancipated months and months before? We're talking about 250,000 of enslaved people just in Texas. 250,000. And let us always remember that when we think about the wealth of this nation, it was built in part, but a big part, on the unpaid labor of Black people. So I was blown away that Henry Louis Gates says, I don't know a scholar who believes the whole story about Juneteenth. And then the piece goes on to talk about the general, the Union general, who supposedly delivered, I guess, the news, and put out General Order Number 3. Well, I don't know. Actually, this might be incorrect. That this might not be the guy who said it, but they're talking about. I'm sorry. Back it up, Cullen. What Blow wants to say is emancipation, as given to the slaves of this country by President Lincoln, was not true freedom. Not in Texas and not in anywhere else, really. Blow says it was quasi freedom, it was ostensible freedom, it was freedom with just a ton of strings attached, which, if you think about strings being attached, that means it wasn't freedom. You're not free if you're attached to a bunch of strings. And Blow points out that most Black people couldn't, oh, we're free? All right, I'm out of here. It's just not the way it worked. Because the laws continued to make their free will more of a mirage. Because their bodies were still being policed to nearly the same degree that had been their lot during slavery. This from the National Archives. Most white Texans desired to keep Blacks as close to their formerly enslaved status as possible. Therefore, they fiercely resisted any actions that would potentially elevate Blacks to a competitive social, political, or economic status. And that was true throughout the Confederacy. And here's where I went awry before. So, a Union general, Gordon Granger, showed up in Galveston, and he delivered General Order Number 3, which I will quote from. It said, "The connection heretofore existing between former masters and slaves would instead become that between employer and hired labor." But it went on to say that the freed men are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. In other words, they really were not free to say, I'm out of here. The Galveston Daily News informed the public that, quote, "No persons formerly slaves will be permitted to travel on the public thoroughfares without passes or permits from their employers." Ha! How's that for free? In other words, their former owners had the power to prevent them from moving. In 1866, a Texas state constitutional convention adopted what's called the Black Codes that codified all kinds of what Blow calls suffocating limits on Black people's autonomy, including this. African Americans without jobs, this is from the Texas State Library and Archives Commission. African Americans without jobs often were assigned to white guardians for work without pay. The penalty for quitting this work without pay often included imprisonment for breach of contract. Other laws prevented Blacks from having free access to any public facilities, fines for all kinds of things, incorrect gesture, a perceived, eye looking in the wrong place, not allowed to testify in court against whites, to serve on juries, or, of course, to vote. So the Black Codes, essentially created a status that was not much removed from their former condition as slaves. So, I don't know why, if all of the, this more new, again, it's nuance. They call this nuance. What are we teaching people? That on this date in 1865, all of a sudden, 250,000 enslaved people in Texas were told, hey, you're free. That's what is celebrated. But it's not really true. And then we've heard of the 13th and 14th Amendment. These were amendments passed immediately after the Civil War. The 13th Amendment to our Constitution outlawed slavery and involuntary servitude. But there was an exception. And here it is. It's in the Constitution. It outlawed slavery except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. Let's stop and think of the fact that no Black could serve on a jury. Think of the fact that law enforcement was quick to arrest Black people, and of course they were then convicted if they were lucky, as opposed to being lynched if they weren't. And so the 13th Amendment wasn't much protection at all. So a lot of former slaves became slaves again, even with the 13th Amendment, because they were found to have committed a crime. All-white jury convicted them, and they're slaves, and then that means, the state owns them. And the state would often lease them out. They were property again. Lease them out as unpaid labor. So again, here is Black people forced into involuntary servitude and essentially funding government services. All this thing was, the white folks saw this as a very practical way of eliminating the cost of building prisons. You didn't have to hold them in prison. You could lease them out right back to where they'd come from and make them work for no pay. It generated tremendous profits in the private sector and used as well for the state coffers. And then he points this out. Stop and think about it. If a person is your property, then you have what Blow calls a perverse incentive to keep them healthy, to feed them enough, because their value is in their ability to work. So he said that once they weren't slaves, but rather these unpaid, leased out prisoners. Nobody actually owned them, and nobody had the incentive to treat them well. So in some respects, some people probably found themselves even in worse conditions. Anyway, all of this blew my mind this morning. And I just wonder, it makes me again wonder, why do we continue? And it's not just us, it's any country does this. The mythologizing, the creation of, national myths. Why do we fear truth? And why can't we embrace reality? I just, well, you see, we're sure seeing some people have absolutely no ability there. Anyway, Charles Blow ends his piece today saying this: perhaps the best way to consider Juneteenth is not as the moment Black people attained freedom, but as a moment in the long-running struggle to realize freedom. Because when slavery is replaced by black codes, Jim Crow, mass incarceration, then true freedom is still elusive. It is a project that is never complete. So, happy Juneteenth to those who celebrate. I understand that, carving out, the good part is that you carve out a federal holiday in which this kind of history perhaps can reach a few more people receptive to facts. Okay. Geez, lots going on as usual. Hang on a minute, guys. Sorry. Roger Wright, is Juneteenth National Make White People Feel Bad Day? That's according to Ron DeSantis. Oh, Oh, dear God in heaven. That is why there is constant suppression of our history, because it's painful for people. What snowflakes these racists are. They called liberal snowflakes? Roger then says Willie Mays was absolutely the greatest. Well, average size baseball player. Well, I'm not sure, Roger, where that's coming from, but you know, I saw some people saying that he was a natural. He just had natural, and again, that's a way of discounting. Those black folks. They're I don't know what they're built differently or something. I don't know. Of all the things I read about Willie Mays in the last 24 hours since we learned of his passing, my favorite was this. It's a quote from him to Charlie Rose in 2010. It's a very simple game, baseball. When they hit it, I catch it. When they throw it, I hit it. Very simple. Of course, uh, anything but. But he classically made it look that way. Just an astonishing athlete, Willie Mays. I won't get into, I saw that even he was not a political guy, so he didn't a lot, black people who were celebrities by virtue of their talents, be it in the arts or in sport, were often criticized mightily by their own when they did not take a front standing position on civil rights and the struggle. And yeah, I'm always disappointed when I hear, that some folks just didn't feel comfortable. Willie Mays being one. Jackie Robinson called him out, for God's sake. And Jackie Robinson was his hero. That must have been painful. Some people just aren't built that way. They're quiet, they're private, and they do what they do. And in Willie Mays' case, do it better than anybody else. I don't pretend to know how to rank, uh, baseball players or how to judge people for where their comfort level is. That's not true. I do know how to judge, and I'm sure I've been pretty uh, pretty tough on a lot of people. But with age comes this recognition that people are different, complicated. Just because you're somebody in the public eye, I mean, I don't know why anyone would want to be in the public eye. if you stop and think about it. I mean, I'm looking at you, Justin Timberlake. I'm looking at you, John Fetterman. I'm looking at, yeah, anybody whose every behavior, every statement, every action is fodder for potential criticism. Why would anyone want to be in that position? Because the public and the media that feed the public are unforgiving. And they do so love to bring people up, elevate them, and then take them down. I wish more people would acknowledge that I don't know. Want to know something funny? I'm assuming you're all using air conditioning. Um, did it ever occur to you as we're all running our air conditioners to stay cool in this brutal heat, that the brutal heat is largely caused by human activity and the fact that we have mucked up the environment because of the emissions from our appliances and things. And so by really relying now on our air conditioning to give us some respite, even to keep people alive during this heat, we are exacerbating the problem. Little bit of a catch-22 going on, because the environmental cost of air conditioning puts us in, a circle that is not good. The United Nations has warned that the amount of energy used for cooling could double by 2050, and that it could well make up a big hunk of the world's greenhouse gas emissions at that point. So, says here, at least until more efficient cooling is widespread, air conditioning will contribute and continue to contribute, as it is right now in my house, to the rising heat that makes you have to have air conditioning to keep from dying from the heat. A vicious circle. Hot weather kills more people than any other weather event. And those numbers are only going to increase. And you're probably seeing stories now about efforts on the part of people who care about other people, that there needs to be protections for those forced to work and labor in this heat without air conditioning. Fewer than 10 states have any sort of workplace heat protections, levels, whatever, in place. And a bunch of the states that are the hottest are not on that list. And that's a choice that is made by state legislators and governors and regulatory folks. Ron DeSantis was mentioned before. Let's mention this vile human again. Earlier this year, as the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis blocked an effort to pass heat safety measures for laborers in his state. Can you imagine? The Biden administration is expected to propose the first federal legislation addressing heat in the workplace. Anybody who suggests that it shouldn't be addressed is a son of a bitch. See, I am not judgmental. I just want to point that out. I know there's talk of FEMA should be able to declare it, in these kinds of instances, a disaster. I don't know. All I know is it's different than it was, and people should not be forced to labor in these conditions without, yeah, adequate respite, water, shade. I don't know. There's some guys working next door today. They were here yesterday. They're all stripped down to shorts, and I can't. And they're laboring out in a neighbor's yard. I can't imagine people working in front of pizza ovens, bakeries. There are places that are so hot to work in, steel mills, and places that defy any kind of air conditioning, right? So I'm just saying, I'm really feeling for these people. A lot of the people doing this tough work are, of course, immigrants. As I said, I've been seeing an awful lot. I don't know. People, I guess, do their redo their roofs in the summer because you ain't gonna do it in the winter. And in my, dog walking, I see them at work. I've mentioned this. I marvel at the danger of their work, and in this weather, I worry about their safety as it regards heat. Um, and as I've said often when I'm walking by a place whose roof is being redone, I hear Spanish being spoken. Or if I see lawns being cared for, I hear Spanish being spoken. This is all outdoor work. And one can assume that some of these hard-working people doing some of the toughest, hardest, hottest jobs are maybe not here legally. And what Biden did yesterday in giving a lifeline to some of them, almost makes me want to cry. Think of living in this country for 10 years, 20 years, but you got in here not legally, but you've lived here, worked here, wed here, became a parent here, paid taxes here, but you're always looking over your shoulder. You live with this constant stress of getting caught and being deported. So, what Biden did yesterday is give the chance of lifting that burden from, they expect about 500,000 people who have been here, married here for over 10 years, have a clean slate, in every way, good citizens if allowed to become citizens. A lot of these folks got some respite from the Dreamers Act, DACA. And stop and think about it. Those dreamers, kids, you're brought here, you're 2, you're 3, you're brought into the country illegally. And the way our laws read before DACA is you could be thrown out and sent back to a country you don't remember, maybe a place you don't even speak the language. So the Dreamers Act allowed some of these kids to breathe a little freer and get educations and become, real members of our economy and social fabric, but still, there's a target on their backs. A lot of the people who will benefit here now will maybe finally be able to breathe freely. Stop and think of all the people who were these children brought here, who became dreamers, but they were shielded a bit by that act done when Obama was president. But the worry wasn't gone because they still worried about their parents. Because their parents couldn't be dreamers. Their parents were still having to look over their shoulders. So somebody who got the protection of DACA, a young person, was still totally, constantly stressed about their mom, their dad, their uncle, other relatives. So can you imagine those children who worried so about their parents are now, many of them, in their mid-30s, and now they themselves are parents. And they are now still afraid of being deported. So they graduated. You read these stories. Here's a woman who was brought here when she was 12 by her mom. She was a dreamer. And under that protection, she went to school and got her nursing degree. And she is now an emergency room nurse in Indiana. And she renews her, I guess you have to renew your your claim under the Dreamers Act every 2 years. And because she has steadfastly done that, she retains her nursing certificate, she retains her job. And now, with what Biden has done, since she is married here now, is the mother of 2 young children, as she said, this would be life-changing for me. It would finally bring me a measure of security, and also for my children. And I know for sure that I could keep doing the work I love to do. And the work she loves to do is saving our lives. She's an emergency room nurse. Donald Trump would toss her out. He would say she's vermin. She's poisoning our blood. And the Republicans are, of course, up in arms about this. If it's something that will help people, the Republicans are against it. Unless it would help a billionaire. Then they're strangely empathetic. Oh, God. Okay. Now, I also, speaking of you know who, did I mention him? I mentioned his ilk. Did I mention Trump? Yeah, I did. I did. Um, there was there was a piece that Roger has written back to explain why he says Willie Mays was only 5'11". He was 180 pounds, over 600 homers, fast as hell. Amazing. Yeah. Well, there wasn't anything he couldn't do except be a civil rights spokesman. This piece was in the Washington Post, and I just really want to share some of it with you because I think a lot of us could have been interviewed for it because the title of it is The Unbearable Heaviness of Thinking Everything is Good for Trump. And it's wonderful because it talks about how, well, let me run down the list. You know, the Access Hollywood tape, right? When that came out, there he is on tape suggesting delight in the fact that he could sexually assault any woman he liked. And we, and a whole bunch of Republicans at the time, thought he's toast. It's over. But it didn't stop him, did it? When he said about the tiki torch bearing racists, bigots, and anti Semites and fascists, there were very fine people on both sides. A lot of people thought, well, that's really going to do him in. No. The first impeachment? No. The election loss? No. The election lies? No. January 6th, leading an insurrection? No, doesn't seem to have stopped his ascent and his power and his hold on an entire political party in our country. Okay, how about the second impeachment? No. All right, indicted on so many crimes, felonies you can't imagine? No. On and on and on, flat out telling us he's going to be a dictator, calling humans vermin, all of that. it's no wonder that a lot of folks think that anything bad that happens to Donald Trump for some reason ends up being good for him. And you've heard of Trump derangement syndrome. That's what the right wing likes to call us, that we all suffer from. But they say it is kind of like, living in this crazy world where none of those things have seemingly harmed him. We all are suffering under a kind of post-traumatic stress disorder. Yeah, Trump derangement syndrome, whatever you want to call it. I don't deny it. There's items in here when the news of his conviction in the New York case came down. There was a woman was in a bar, and the bartender asked someone, "Does that mean he can't run for president anymore if he's a convicted felon?" And the answer, of course, was no, incredibly, it doesn't. He can still run. And the bartender said, "Oh, then this will be good for him." So there's this sense that, yeah, if the more he, the more these things happen that would destroy any other person out there seeking the presidency, the more you then begin to think that he's untouchable. Frank Luntz, who is a political, is he a pollster? Or I don't know. He said, "Trump's running as the world's biggest victim, and Americans rally around victims." And then there's Dan Pfeiffer, who says some things that gave me a little bit of solace. He was a, advisor to President Obama. And he says, and who's going to argue with him, Democrats are always looking for the dark lining in the silver cloud at all times. It's only natural, he says, that people would become catastrophizers when it comes to Trump. But, Pfeiffer says, it's actually not true that he hasn't faced accountability. Every time he has been on the ballot since 2016, literally and figuratively, he has lost. And Pfeiffer goes on to warn us that buying into this mythologizing Trump as some kind of invincible monster who absorbs attacks and only becomes stronger, that might help him. Pfeiffer says, when we pretend like he can survive anything, it imbues him with strength and gives him political advantage with a lot of people. But the reality is, how bad a criminal do you have to be one of the most politically connected and richest guys around and still be convicted of 34 counts of falsifying business records? The truth is, he's a clown. If you actually think it's good to be convicted of multiple felonies, you need to go outside and maybe touch the grass. That's Jesse Ferguson. He does not become more powerful when he is struck down. But the article doesn't end there, because then it goes on to say running as a victim like this is what's done in places where democracy is dying. You run against the state, right? So, those of us who are hand-wringers and worrying about him can say, hey, look, guys, there is a playbook for turning criminal conviction into political advantage. It's just that it's never happened here. Never happened here. I give you a woman who worked for a former Ukrainian prime minister who later became a political prisoner. She says, I know this is a unique situation for the United States, but in other countries where political persecution really does exist, candidates use their criminal cases against them to say, you see, I effectively fought the system and they came for me. So he, she says, is doing what so many others in his position have done in other countries. He is running as a hero, a classical hero, a savior, an emancipator, a vengeance dealer who fighting against this whatever deep state. And that does seem to be working for him. I mean, since the verdict, he's raised $141 million. The notion that this is electorally good for Trump, who knows? Being good for him is different. But the assumption that it won't hurt him, that's a slightly different thing. I know they sound the same. But whatever, the polls conducted since he's been convicted have been inconclusive on the question of whether the guilty verdict will hurt him. There's a small shift toward Biden, although almost nothing has changed in voters' intentions about the upcoming election. I don't know. Trump's base is going to love him no matter what. And it's hard to think that anyone is going to be, because he's now a convicted felon, that will sway people to vote for him. Oh, he's a convicted felon? Well, then I'm off the fence. So, I mean, if you think of it that way, yeah. I don't know. Just want to tell you, the unbearable heaviness of thinking everything is good for Trump, written by Ben Terrace in the Washington Post. Hey, good news. Thailand is set to become the first Southeast Asian country to legalize same-sex marriage. And amazingly, this passed Thailand's Senate. Here there'd be we got there through the Supreme Court, through the Supreme Court, not the current one. because I don't think congressionally we ever would have done it. But that's not true in Thailand because their Senate overwhelmingly passed 130 votes to 4 with some abstentions yesterday afternoon. And as one person said, love wins. It just needs, I guess, the king to give his imprimatur, which is expected. The only two other Asian countries that allow gay marriage, Taiwan and Nepal, kinda. I think Nepal's a little bit of a strange kind of a thing, but yeah. But that's it. And in fact, while this is going on, just in Indonesia, just last year, gay marriage is last year they in Indonesia, extramarital sex was declared criminal. And believe me, gay marriage is criminal. 2019, Brunei made gay sex punishable by death. Not just any death, too, death by stoning. So this is something that, yeah, Thailand said, let's do it. Got no reason not to. Seems right. Now, India came close to doing legalizing gay marriage last year. But their Supreme Court did not sign off. It sent it back to Parliament, said this is something Parliament needs to do. And their newly re-elected for the third term, authoritarian wannabe Prime Minister Modi has spoken out strongly against legalizing gay marriage. But if India were, absent Modi, I think they would have done it. But as I said, he was just reelected. Hey, a shout out to Ian McKellen. McKellen, right? Yeah. McKellen, the British actor, the Lord of the Rings actor, who's still acting because that's what he does. He's 85 years old, and he's in this play in which he plays Falstaff, the sort of comic Shakespearean figure. And last 2 nights ago, he's in the play, 85. He's in a duel. It's a 4-hour play. He duels, he this and that, but he fell off the stage. Now stop and think about it. I don't know. That's a fall. He fell off the stage. Anyway, a statement released by his publicist says this: I want to thank everyone for their kind messages and support. I'm hugely indebted to the doctors and nurses who treated me. They have assured me that my recovery will be complete and speedy, and I am looking forward to returning to work. And wouldn't you know, he's returning to work today. He fell off the stage Monday, I think. Sunday or Monday. 85. And he's getting up and going right back into the fray. Yeah, he missed one performance, yesterday's. Now, he's almost 10 years older than I am. I got to tell you something. I could. If I fell off a stage, first of all, odds are I would break a bunch of bones because that's the way I roll. God, I mean, I'm just so impressed. So, a tip of my hat, Ian McKellen. Jeez, wow, man, good for you. So, I guess that's it, guys. Thank you very much. Keep your cool. I can't say that to myself because I rarely do, but I'll be back tomorrow because I don't know any better.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.